2 diabetes is epidemic in India, and we are leading in diabetic population as well. And this is mainly because of lifestyle problems, and eating is one of the important factor which plays an important role for obesity, insulin resistance, and other comorbidities as well. Whenever we ask a patient about their eating habits and ask them to they used to say 6 இட்லி அப்படிம்பாங்க. கொஞ்சம் கம்மியாக சாப்பிடுங்க அப்படின்னா இல்லை 6 இட்லி கூட சாப்பிடாம எப்படி சார் அப்படிம்பாங்க. So there is some problem there in eating, and Dr. Krishna Seshadri is here to tell us why they eat more than they need. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Here's my conflict of interest. I do have a weakness of food, especially when I come to Coimbatore. I run off to Ananda's or Annapurna to get. Let me start with the Tiruvallur, of course. These of you who read Tirukkural, one suggestion is please use the Parimelazhagar Urai, because without Parimelazhagar you can't understand Tirukkural. All the others are just, explanations, but if you listen to Parimelazhagar, he will tell you, தன் பகுதியும் அதற்கு ஏற்ற உணவும் காலமும் ஆராயாத வேண்டியதோர் உணவை வேண்டியதோர் காலத்து வயிற்று தீ அளவின்றி ஒருவன் உண்ணுமாயின் நோய் அளவு இன்றிப்படும். I have never, whenever you read Tirukkural, please read Parimelazhagar, because without it, I always think Tirukkural is a suttiram, it is not a marai. Marai means maraithu solvadu. Suttiram is a small two-line thing to give you a hint on what to understand. And without Parimelazhagar, it's difficult to understand Tirukkural. So how do we eat? When you think about eating, there are 2 reasons we eat. One is well-being, which is promoted by the body's sensors, and reward. Otherwise, we won't feel like eating. And these are maintained by some drivers. One is desire, the second is the emotion and the cognition that goes with it. The third is the body's metabolic and homeostatic sensors. And lastly, and we are increasingly learning about it, and something that I keep talking about all the time, is the clocks are internal and external clocks. Now, the most important part of the metabolic and the homeostatic sensor is to promote well-being. The most important part of desire and cognition and emotion is to provide a reward sensation, right? Now, remember that the metabolic and homeostatic sensor also works through the desire, and it can also promote reward. Why? Human beings need a motivation to survive and do things. That is why eating is wired in as a reward, and I'll show you other examples as we go in. Now, there are 2 other concepts that we need to understand. Memory. For example, your mother would all the time, whenever you ask for food, give you bread. As you get older, you said, chinna vayasu muzhukka bread days after valandita, I don't want bread anymore. That's memory. Your aversion or your desire based on a childhood memory. I'll talk about it. And of course, wiring. Why are we different? Because we are all wired differently. Now, this is run by 5 important concepts of what happens when you take food. One is our sensations. In Sanskrit, indiriyangal, right? And then perception. So you take these both together, it becomes karmendriyam and jnanendriyam. Then anticipation. Sometimes, the other thing that we all do for reward is basically more anticipation than the actual act. The anticipation of love, the anticipation of somebody. Kaakka vaikpadil sugamundu, kaathirupadil sugamundu, kaakka vaikpadil sugamundu illaya. Adhe mare anticipation is a desire, is a pleasure of its own. Ingestive. As you eat, there are signals, and of course metabolic. Now, The metabolic and the homeostatic work pretty much through sensory and perception. And let's go through each of these. The external environment, two parts. One is food. The second is the cue for the food. It may be a thought, it may be a smell, it may be a sight, right? But each of us is wired differently for food. Let me talk to you about a minute. One is genetic. Very interestingly, taste itself is very different. The first time I understood this was in the US, our department had a get-together, and each of us brought some food. And I had gotten to Dewan Street and and then I made some food, but I brought some jalebis from Dewan Street. Everything was completely finished, but the jalebis were left untouched by the American friends at that time. They said, Dr. Seshadri, Indian sweets are too sweet for us. But much later you realize that how we perceive sweet depends on our taste receptors, and there are polymorphisms for these taste receptors. I've just given you an example. This is a TAS1-3 promoter. There are elite polymorphisms that give us a difference in the way we perceive sugar itself. So Europeans have a lesser taste for sweet, and that's why your Italian and other sweets are not that sweet. On the other hand, you come down south, we have the payasams and this thing. I have a feeling it's also tropical, but that's very, very important. The second part is our epigenetic wiring, meaning what happens, for example, in childhood. For example, in the Netherlands, when they faced a lot of famine, people actually looked at it, that there were mitochondrial modifications that later brings about a hunger. For example, if this also has memory. For example, I remember very well, my father came from a very poor background. One of the things that would be important for him is that he eats well, and he also feeds the people around him. So it's somewhat epigenetic. But the third part, I'm sorry, I forgot to put that, is sex. For example, if you're a woman, you like sweets better. You ask women, they'll tell you chocolates are not sweets, right? But men, yesterday we were sitting up in one of the rooms, and it was my fault. I had asked for Ananda's chips and mixture and everything. Just got finished in a minute. Men like salty stuff. Similarly, women crave sweets premenstrually. So there is also a sex-based or a gender-based wiring that's there. So this is one part. But let us look again, go back to Thiruvalluvar, because he helps us understand many things better than we do. Miginum kurayinum noi seyyum நூலோர் வழிமுதலா எண்ணிய மூன்று. This மூன்று is, and again you need Parimel Azhagar, because he will interpret மூன்று as ஆயுள்வேத முடையரால் வாத முதலாக எண்ணப்பட மூன்று, meaning he recognized the wiring. When Ayurveda talks about Pitta, Vata and Kapha, they don't mean it's Pittam, Vatam and Kapha. It's a kind of genetic makeup, and the wiring determines how you respond to food. Okay, so I talked about these. Let's talk about clocks. Clocks have a very, very important way on how the metabolism is perceived, the homeostasis is perceived, and the reward is perceived. Let's give you some examples. So these are homeostatic inputs. So basically, from the time you start eating, there are stretch, there are endocrine cells, there are metabolic cells. All of these integrate in two places. One is the corticolimbic system, and then in the ventral hypothalamus. So ultimately what really happens is, in the ventral hypothalamus, there is a balance that occurs. On this side are the orexogenic peptides, which are NPY and CART. On this side, the anorexogenic peptides, which is AGRT, alpha MSH, working through M4CR. So depending on the metabolic and the reward-based inputs, there is a determination of, do you want to eat? Should I eat? Or is there more to eat? Now, These are controlled both short term and long term. Short term is by ghrelin. If I start talking about food, you start getting a little hunger. That's ghrelin working. On the other hand, the long-term sensors are leptin and insulin. Now, interestingly, till now we did not know the influence of clock on this. But it appears that the clock, the internal clock, what time do you eat, how do you eat, the internal clock, that sets it working at the AGRP neurons. So clearly, the clock bit is a very, very important determinant of how much you eat. You FAFO the clock, you start eating at all times, odd times, and eat more. So this is the neuroanatomy of food intake. There are sensory, perceptive, and anticipatory signals. These go to the corticolimbic system. Then there is the hindbrain, which brings in the ingestive and metabolic. These are integrated in the hypothalamus. All right? What happens next? How do we sense reward? Now, when we sense reward, there are two parts to it. One is feeling nice about it. That's endorphins. The second is a motivation to action. I may like something, but I need to go get it, right? I may like Aishwarya Rai, but my body says, no, 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 you don't want to go get her. You will get killed by somebody. So, dopamine is the motivation to action. The opioid is the pleasure sensation, right? And this motivation to action is a continuous process to get to eat. As you're eating, should I continue to eat? When should I stop eating is all determined by dopamine. So again, just to put this together. Now, to sort of bring this to a circle, there are two other parts, cue and trait. What is a cue? Basically, I talked to you about cue and I also talked about gender. The reward system is maintained at this particular part, the ventral tegmental nucleus, the nucleus accumbens, and the striatum. But also memory. I remember sitting in my home, my mother would make boli on today's Avni Avitam. I would take some honey and ghee with it. Long after my mother is gone, I would tell my wife, if I had that food today, I would be very, very happy. Isn't it? Chandelian Solva, life is very interesting. The beauty of life is youth. You spend the first half of your life anticipating it, and the second half of your life remembering it. It's all it is, it's memory. So the memory is at the hippocampus and amygdala. That senses a reward. If, for example, in your childhood, your father took you to Annapurna and you ate, anytime you come to Coimbatore, you'll say, let me go to Annapurna because that's where my father took me. Now, to whether you want to eat depends on four things. Whether you like it, whether you want it, have you learnt it, or is it a habit? So let's look at this. Whether you like it intrinsically is by the opioid receptor. But whether you like it consciously is at the prefrontal cortex. Liking is not just taste, it is condition, it is the environment, it is your growth, it is your development. Now, wanting is basically dopamine. It's a mesolimbic dopamine system that is projecting to the nucleus accumbens. Now, but what happens, okay, I may like something, as I eat it, you know what, this morning I had a heavy breakfast, but I see Adapradaman there, but you know what, maybe I should not eat it. That is called devaluation, where your dopamine system is telling your opioid system, you know what, not a good idea. But some of us can't control that. So one more bout and one more bout in the wash basin. Learning is hippocampus. You know what? I was with Rajesh this morning. So I love hash browns. So I had hash browns ordered, but Rajesh told me, I gave it to him. Sir, no sir, if I have potatoes of any form, I will regret it later. So that is learning. But habit, okay, doesn't matter. If I come to Coimbatore, My breakfast has to be